No? Yes, 3, 2, 1. Oh, hi. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the KUDO community meeting. It's Thursday, the 9th of May, 2019. My name is Fabian Baier, and we have a packed agenda today. Actually, let me share that agenda with you so you see what I'm talking about. There we go. That's the agenda. It's shared in the chat as well. Here. The recording of the last agenda you find here. And we talked today a little bit about application operator CRDs, framework developer CRDs. I'll give a CLI update. We talk about maybe about the skeleton generator previous values if Denis is on the call. And then we have an open discussion. So without further ado, I would say let's give it up to whoever wants to talk about application operator CRDs. Is that you, Jared? I saw you in that document.
Yeah, this one will be quick. Okay. I think I showed off the 5-step plan for this in the last community meeting. And that is, as of today, we're going to maintain instance and create a package barrier between the CLI and the actual CRD that gets created when you run an install. We're going to make the struct work for both an instance and a dynamic CRD. And then once the cap for GA CRDs lands, we'll swap it out under the hood. The install experience won't change at all. Now you'll have dynamic CRDs, and then we just need to write but we'll need to scope and write a webhook that will then convert an instance CRD to an application CRD on create, so that things like GitOps don't break, or like a Valero restore doesn't break. So I'll write all those details up in the KEP. Obviously I'm not going to go deep in the implementation details on the admission hook. I'll just say that we're going to have one, and I'd be comfortable moving that with approvals to implementable if that sounds good to everyone else. After a short review,
I would probably change the name. Application CRD is already something in SIGApps.
So how about
I was confused as to when looking at this what you were talking about. But
yeah, how about end or instance dynamic instance CRD?
Yeah, I still like the idea that even if we change the instance CRD to something dynamic per framework, those particular types of CRDs that we dynamically generate can be grouped together as instance CRDs rather than framework CRDs.
Okay. Yep. I'll work on that right after this, and after we do some more API development. So I'll update that PR and send the link out tomorrow morning. So beginning of day, your time, it'll be ready to review. That's it for that one.
All right, and then that is also including the framework developer CRDs, or
no, that's separate.
Separate. All right.
I think, Tom, do you want to give a breakdown of the past couple of days? And we can. No, you want me to? All right, cool. So we still need to write the CAP for this, but what we're doing right now here in Hamburg, and Tom's doing separately, is we've been iterating on different approaches to define and implement frameworks, and we've settled on a language called Q, which stands for Configure, Unify, Execute, and it's a data constraint language made by Marcellus Van Luizen, and I probably butchered that for the recording, but he's a Googler on the Go core team. Wrote Q. It's got a lot of inspiration from BCL and other internal languages, and is giving us a really nice reusable construct for creating frameworks that ultimately bubbles down into something that we can use, be it JSON or YAML. And so far, every time we've gone to write a framework with this, we've evolved it in a couple different directions, but we're feeling pretty good on it. As far as how you generate a framework, it looks really good. How you write a framework, it actually makes it fun and feel productive, and we can start to talk about abstractions, which is really, really nice. So we need to create the KEP for this. If someone wants to volunteer to write a KEP for this whole thing. and we can assign it a number and file it and get it in. It'll probably be, when we propose it, it'll probably come with the full proposal since we're iterating on it in real time. But you know, I think as part of the vetting process, we had to go through that all without just the design. So this is going to affect a couple things. We're going to need to change create a new CRD for the queue storage. We're going to need to contend with the fact that queue, we may want to embed queue or a form of queue into the KUDO CLI. Fortunately, queue is very usable as a package, and so that would be its own subcommand. And we have to contend with the fact that queue has dynamic subcommands that framework developers can define. And this is really cool because, and this is worthy of its own separate cap, because you could say in the MySQL framework, command shell, right? And then do the kubectl exec to automatically dump you into the shell for an instance. So you can say kubectl KUDO MySQL shell instance equals this, and boom, you're in a MySQL shell. Like the potential there to allow people to dynamically define subcommands on the KUDO CLI is really, really interesting, and especially being able to do it without having to ship another plugin system, which was one of our issues, and have it just live in the framework. I think is really compelling. So I think that should be a separate.
Yeah. So how would that like integrate if it's not a separate plugin system? Like you mentioned the queue storage. Like, can you?
Yeah. So I'll share my screen real quick of the Kubernetes example of this. Hang on, let me pull up. Give me a moment. Doc, tutorial, Kubernetes. Create tool, is that it? Yeah, okay. So here's an example of the definition of a command. And you have a command create, and in here you have some tasks, and it's going to run those tasks. So you have a kube task. It's going to exec a command for you, and then it's going to run this command. So these commands do have to be in your path. So we may eventually want to talk about, okay, well, how do we make sure JQ and other things are installed? You pass it a standard in, right? And we can just marshal in anything that's in the rest of the queue definition. And then we have a standard out that's a string. And so this is going to return a string as from standard out. And then we have a display task where it's going to print whatever that standard out was. So it'll create and print. And now you have queue create as in your CLI tool ready to go. And it's pretty cool.
That's pretty cool.
Figure out though, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's very nice. Cool.
So any operations now can then be specified as in 8 lines by whoever. I think you get the point. So, and then I think there was there another cap? I mean, there'll be some ongoing things as we add features to the operator language. I think that'll be separate caps. One of those was. Yeah, doing things like canaries or being able to pause between phases for more advanced readiness gates that don't just depend on our readiness checks. But I think we can evolve into that. We don't have to add every feature out of the gate today, especially because we still have access to all the Kubernetes YAML or spec. I don't want to say YAML because it'll be Q. We have access to the Kubernetes spec. Any other, Tom, anything you want to add on that? Anyone else?
I think it's a good overview. We're gonna figure out the devil into details as we get into it.
Yeah.
But it's early assessment says that there shouldn't be any big hurdles in all the capabilities we want to accomplish. And I think we should take that framework, dynamic framework 1.0, HackMD, the requirements there, and kind of go through those in the KEP and make sure that we don't see any problem with any of those. because that was kind of our guidelines for that dynamic CRD. HackMD was, let's make sure we're not going to break any of these constraints that'll be needed.
Do you think you could have that ready by the next community meeting? The cap to.
Let's make that. Well, it's just next week.
If it's ready earlier, that's great. I just want to be able to assign in a number next week. Next week's community meeting.
We'll just make it a goal. Certainly, the motivation goals.
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. We may be still working on the proposal, but as long as we can get it merged in, and I think the goal, a goal. Well, we'll talk about that I'd like later, but I would like to also get it implementable in short order once we know kind of what we're doing here. But there's going to be some things on the API and stuff to figure out. The Go side of that.
I'm happy doing the goals as an initial KEP and then doing a PR into it for proposal just to make sure we can all agree on that and that's not holding us up.
Yep. Summary, motivation, goals, non-goals.
Yeah.
We can move it forward. Okay, cool. I think that's it on the framework developer side then.
All right, great. Okay, so last week around the time I talked a little bit about CLI updates. Now I'm sharing the screen. There we go. All right, so I hope you see my screen now. So talked about CLI updates last week. There's the link to the design doc here in the document, and feel welcome also to edit and suggest things. If you don't have access, just request access. You should have access. Yeah, what I wanted to do today is I'll just prototype real fast an approach of how I thought maybe the distribution of packages through the CLI would make sense from the get-go, like installing it from reaching out to a repository. And then over the airplane flight actually to Germany, I built something like a repository server that has under the hood connections to, for instance, your local volumes or to Google cloud storage. It lives in this branch here. So I forked the KUDO and then I have a CLI improvement branch. And so what I essentially did is I integrated it with Google Cloud Storage, and the bucket that I created there looks pretty much like this here. You have an index YAML file. So this is just a high-level structure. You would have an index YAML file, and then you would have similar style packages. So that should look familiar to you. That is inspired by Helm and other open source projects out there, and so it's being used there and looks like a good approach and a very working example here. What you don't see yet is any verification. Jared mentioned there, for instance, using Go TUF, if I pronounce that correctly, TUF, for verification or shipment for those packages. Helm uses a provenance file, for instance, but for that rapid prototype, this should be fine enough. And then the repo name here is just a test repo that I created, KUDO test repo. It's a public repo, so you should be available to reach it under this URL as well. That is a good reminder, actually, that there is not yet the KUDO, if you will, frameworks.storage.googleapis.com repo taken, and I hope not anyone else takes that but us. But the names are just names, yeah, so maybe we can change that then. But so from the flow here, how it would do is the CLI right now has this constraint with working with GitHub. So this improvement here should kind of go a little bit away from GitHub and uses as a repository host, essentially like Google. And the first step it really does when you want to install, for instance, here Kafka, it would go and connect always to that index YAML file. And the index YAML file has a specific format. Let's just download it there and look at it. Let's see if I can open it. There we go. So that's debatable and open to discussion. Just came up with something for now. It consists of entries. So it has, for instance, the Kafka entry and then the Zookeeper entry. And within this one, it has an app version, which describes the version of the underlying base technology, in this case, Kafka 2.4.0. The name of the actual bundle, in quotes, and then the version of that bundle. So the actual TCC file or tar file that you see here, Kafka 010, is basically a combination out of the name and the version. And then you have the URL where you can download it. And the same happens here for the Zookeeper one. So what it does then is if you type in kubectl kudo install Kafka, it would try to find the latest version if you not otherwise define that of Kafka, for instance. And then tries to download that file, untars it, and then installs it to your cluster where KUDO is running. So the command prepared that here is, for instance, you have an environment variable, KUDO repo path, that saves this caches this repo essentially then locally in the TMP file. And then you would also say with the install command, the package version, you can cherry pick it, or it just takes the latest one. In this case, it doesn't matter, there's just one. And we start with 010. And it would also install all dependencies. Let's just see real quick if I have my Minikube up and running. Yep, that should look all right. And let's just open here, clear, and see if that works already today. It worked on Tuesday, so it should work, hopefully. Let's say installation. Which directory am I? In the wrong one, of course. Okay. There we go. Yes. And now what we should see here actually is Zookeeper deploying. So it actually connected to Google Cloud Storage. It found the index file. In that index file, it found our Kafka one. In our Kafka one, it downloaded it to that local file. And then it applied it, and it applied then the dependencies first in Kafka. So if I actually look now here in TMP KUDO community demo, you would see it downloaded the index file. It automatically downloaded and compressed the tar file. And then it just like what it did earlier as well for the improvement, it applied the framework version and the instance YAML to your cluster. And there you have your Kafka then up and running. But that's just a demo in a nutshell. The interesting thing is you could basically pick that directory where you want to save your repo, and you could also like later on probably would have to add like commands like repo init or repo add if you want to add more things to your repo. But that gives us a little bit more freedom and goes a little bit away from hosting it on GitHub and using the GitHub API. It just basically uses an HTTP client that connects to Google, and the only thing it actually requires is this structure with an index file that gives then the direction on to where to find all those things. That also gives you the freedom that you could, for instance, have an incubating repository or a stable repository or a private repository, or pointed to any of your own repositories, not just the official one that is by default used, but similar like Helm does it, you could just point to another storage bucket with another storage prefix, for instance, to actually like access your own ones that you created. Yep, but that would be the demo real quick, and I just want to open it up for discussion and want to hear what you guys think. If that sounds something we can work with, it's currently under my repo fork. So if you want to try it out yourself and see if you run into any issues or want to play around with it, feel free as well. But yeah. Questions?
Good stuff. Does the Google Storage API adhere to the same thing as S3 and MinIO?
Yeah.
It might be good if this is how we proceed to like make a demo about setting up your own on-prem framework repository.
Yeah, right. So on the airplane, because of like, I want to have maybe air gap clusters as well, right? So on the flight to Germany, I built this little, I call it KUDO registry, but and what it does under the hood is it's just a chin web server, but it has this where is it, storage class. So it has right now this local storage class, and storage is just defined as an interface, list objects, get objects, and so forth. That's similar to, for instance, what Helm does with the chart museum. And so what we could do is, right now I have your local as one of the storage backends, but you could easily add Google. So I did that the other day when I earlier prototyped some idea around this. You could just add Google, you could just add menu, you could just add S3, and then you have it swappable. And all it is essentially, idea here is within Chart Museum, it has this endpoint or this like standardized endpoints under which you can easily essentially reach the index YAML file and then the corresponding charts or frameworks. And that could be also like air-gapped, or that could be your private ones on-prem hosted. So yeah, that would go to that, towards that. Thought already about it. Yeah.
Yeah, the interface is a good idea. I like that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Have you put any thought into, this is great, have you put any thought into a storage location on disk for this and other KUDO things? Like you have a .helm, would we want a .kudo maybe?
Yeah, so right now, let me share here real quick again. I think right now what I did here was I put it into .kudo./repo. So if I,
oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, so that was the default, I think. Let's see if I, no. So if I would do the same command actually without this little like just environment variable or then or parameter that would be set, it should compress it and download it. Let's see, into KUDO, and then it has this repo one, and then there is the file as well. And then the other thing is, as soon as it sees that in this directory that you pointed to, you have already this Kafka one, it doesn't download it again. So there's a problem with, or there's an issue when you have inconsistencies in syncing, for instance. So you sync it from the official repo, and then you tweak it, and then which one do you want to apply? So what it actually does is it always favors your local installation first. And so that's also a great way when you want to install it over airplanes, for instance, because you have it locally on your machine. And if I play now with the Kafka one, and then I use the same CLI command, it doesn't override my changes by going back to the cloud storage, downloading it and overriding it, for instance. Yeah.
Is this where provenance, or really like the signing part of a provenance might help mitigate some of that as well, where we could throw an error if it differs?
Yeah, exactly. That would, or the go tough approach. Yeah. So that would potentially help. But I think for now, maybe the verification part, if we could implement that already, or we could wait until actually a user is asking us to do it, and then we iterate from there. It would just be one more step in between those steps added. Shouldn't break the thing though. Yeah. I don't know. Actually, I saw that Go Tough is good with like making sure that you get the actual package that you wanted, but I'm not so sure how good it is in kind of like syncing it automatically behind you. If they, I haven't seen that logic there. Do you know if that logic exists there?
I don't know.
I think I haven't seen it, but maybe I can have a look again. But
I don't know on GoTough. I know someone who is updating Kubernetes binaries using Tough. The Apex developer is, so Apex/up might have some Tough stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And we can talk to him as well, but I don't know if he had to write something separate or he just used this.
GoTough build failing. Ooh. It's GoTough, for instance, like forces on you their own like a folder structure and so forth. Yeah. So the folder structure I came up with is essentially just like whatever is in that file, basically, or in that folder of that version is just compressing the CRD files or whatever gets then applied to the cluster. And that should work then also with the Q exec command, for instance, that you could just add there. So that plays in very well there. Another thing that is then maybe interesting is the Semver versioning that would actually make sense here. And so yeah, let's say you have multiple Kafka versions. They would all live in the same repository, but not like in a nested subfolder that is then incubating, or like how we have it right now in the frameworks, a folder structure with 0 and 1. That's kind of the idea that we took over from the universe. It would just be an ongoing Semver number that increments, for instance, 0.2.0. And then, so what the Semver sorting does, that's this mastermind Semver Golang library that is being used there. It essentially sorts it already after the highest Semver version number. And then by default, if you don't add in that install command the actual version, and you would just leave that out, what it would do is it would then just take the highest number. But it also, I think right now in the CLI, we don't even have the option that we could actually pick that actual package version number. So that list would also support this, and would if you add a newer version, this would just be incremented there under Kafka. I think that's also a little bit nicer than like creating a new folder and making sure that it is higher, and that's all been taken care by just following now Semver. And that would then also introduce the Semver versioning scheme and everything that comes with it on agreeing on what version number what has. So oh yeah, actually what's good noticing when you actually introduce this Semver version number thing is if we look at the Kafka framework version YAML, for instance, right now. Where am I? Okay. So if we look into this, so what I changed there is actually a little bit the structure of the YAML for the version, so it actually works with it. There we have it. So you see the actual name is Kafka with the actual Semver version. And then the version number here is also the Semver version. And we used to have that's actually different from what we used to have. We have 2.11-2.4.0, for instance, right now as a version. And we have this name also differentiating. Yeah. But I think that would also just be a logical conclusion of if we introduce the Semver versioning and want to version our bundles that we then distribute, that we also then call the CRDs in that version to not cause any confusion. Right now, I think it is, if we look into the Kafka one, you see here, for instance, version 2.11.0, and here you see it's just 0.1.0, and the same thing in line 6 here. So that's something that I adjusted for this example in this test repo. I did the same thing also for Zookeeper, just to keep it in sync with what the actual version is, and that should then also give your cluster operator the opportunity to actually see what version of which bundle that was verified before it was installed to your cluster, for instance, and so forth. Right. But that's an interesting thing to note.
And you can still derive the app version from that, the actual.
Yeah. The interesting part is that the app version is added also in that index YAML file. And so when I develop a framework, I think somewhere I need to provide that information, what's the underlying version that I have before I switch to our own framework versioning that starts at 0.1.0, yeah. And that is basically this app version. Yeah. In the CLI design doc, there's a little bit naming convention and Semver kind of conventions discussed and what I mean by app version, what's a bundle, what's the application, what's the framework, and how is that differentiated. And I established a little hierarchy in the document. Switch real quick to that. Maybe that's interesting too. So let's see if that doesn't show. Okay, there we go. Here under naming conventions, for instance, introducing the version scheme, what this is about, and then here a hierarchy, that a framework, that's the concept, the idea, like an interface, and then it gets it has an application, and that gets then like implemented at some point down to an instance, but it's shipped, for instance, on a bundle. And so it's all of them are explained here, and I think we should also agree on if that actually would make sense. If we need those naming, maybe we don't need them at all. But that's why I meant maybe a few eyes on this part would actually make sense. I think it's helpful when we look at the distribution with the CLI, just to not have too many namespaces that collide then at some point. Yeah. And this been then discussed also, like tomorrow we have a pipeline meeting on how we should build the pipeline for our KUDO frameworks repository and what should happen under the hood. And so one easy idea would be that as soon as there is a PR that is being merged into master, then we just like generate this bundle, the Kafka, and from all of the frameworks that we have, the bundle files, and upload them into this bucket here, and have this as our official one hosted through Google Cloud Storage for now. But giving them with the CLI the option, and with maybe this KUDO registry, the option to also host it on-prem with your own repository. Yep. All right. I think I covered what I wanted to say there.
What do you think about immutability of versions uploaded to a repository? Maybe this is a separate repo discussion, but should you ever be able to push on top of Kafka 0.10?
No, that's why. So that's why I think we should follow the SEMWA and the 11 rules. And so what I did in that document, I actually like made a little summary what it actually means for us. And so that would be a patch. That would be rule number 7. And the patch version must reset to 0 when minor version is incremented. And then you just like essentially like call it then 0.1.1. But as soon as you basically have like basic changes then in the major version, then you kind of like increment the Y, and then if you have actually a public API change, then you increment the actual like what is it, X. Yeah. This number here, just the normal SEMWA approach there. So if there are changes, and that keeps it also very good in sync with like what how many files we have. So there wouldn't actually be then a file that has been overwritten. Shouldn't even be accidentally, and we could implement things that prohibit that, of course. But as soon as you make a change to that file, it would be then, depending on what type of change, it would be an incremented version of whatever the current one is. Yeah.
So I had a question. In addition to versioning, which and I haven't read that doc, so I look forward to reviewing it. So I apologize if it's already covered, but we also tend to have a notion of incubating or graduated or maybe certified, which is a designation that might be associated with a version. And I don't see it in the metadata. And I was wondering if you were okay, you're pulling up stuff.
But that's a great question. So like one idea that I had was having this kind of tag, because incubating and stable is maybe something that we use, but maybe a future user doesn't really think this is the right way. So having then an index YAML or like a description in here where you have, for instance, here a tag that you call, I don't know, can, and then you could have it filtered after that tag, that would allow you also within the same folder structure, which is like just one level, one decree, having basically all kinds of maybe then even different Kafka 0.10, but they are different within the tag, and there's maybe one incubating, one stable, yeah, and so that was the idea of having tags that kind of replace or can be then also automatically used with incubating and stable.
I like it.
Yeah,
that answers the question. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, more questions? So what I would do next is after the meeting tomorrow for just with the pipeline as well to see what is actually needed from our end here. Helm has, for instance, this repo add and also some sync mechanisms there. So that is probably, maybe it's interesting to add to the CLI instead of the install command, which is kind of like this high level wrapper around little sub commands. Maybe add also an repo command where you could do specific things then with your repo that can be then used by the CI/CD pipeline to actually come up with this entire repo here. Yeah, so I guess that's what I find out then tomorrow in the meeting and see how other projects are doing it. But I think that's the right way to go there. Yeah. Okay, I don't know why I muted myself there. That's probably a signal to see if anyone else wants to say something. If not, we have, let's see, is Denis on the call? No. Does anyone else want to like maybe talk about the two skeleton generator and previous values, or should we just wait for the next week meeting when Denise may be around? I think we maybe wait then. Okay, good. Yeah, so the next item point is then the wrap up or the open discussion. So anything that we haven't discussed here, or maybe more questions came up or some associative thinking. So just want to open it up to the round. I saw also some new faces here, so if you haven't spoken, if you want to say something, even if it's a hi, that's your chance. Wow, exciting. Everyone is like, woohoo. Yeah, well, I'm jet lagged too. So I think I slept like in the last 36 hours, 3 hours. I don't know, this jet lag is crazy. Okay. One thing for the open discussion for the next meeting that I have already on my item list is the time change and what time zone we should actually do the next meeting. So we did now this twice in the European time zone. And I know we are the next Thursday, still a lot of us will be still in the European time zone. So maybe it's worth to keep doing that for next week, or we switch it to another time zone. I don't know if we have people from APAC, but I think we haven't done anything special for APAC.
What time is it now over in
San Francisco, or where?
I was looking at the time in China. Okay, yeah, because it's 9:43 there now, PM.
Yeah, I think so. What you added that into the KUDO channel. What other SIG groups do? They do every 4 weeks or so. I think one Wednesday evening or so for APAC to accommodate their time zone. Instead of like every 4 weeks, they, instead of doing it like we do it at this time, they just change entirely the time for that meeting of that week.
We could do it given that all internal contributors will be on European time zone. We could do it at 9 a.m. Hamburg time, which would, I think, accommodate that pretty well, wouldn't it? I'm bad at time math.
3 p.m. You go talk at 9:15 next Tuesday.
Oh, I do. 10. I was looking at the wrong day. 10 a.m. then, which would be what time in China?
So 10 a.m. That's 4 hours. That is actually midnight there. I don't know.
10 a.m. Hamburg is midnight China.
10 a.m. Hamburg is probably That's like 5 hours back from what we have right now, or so. That would be like 4 p.m. afternoon or something around that. So that sounds like a good time. If we have people from there, I mean.
Day though, Tom, that's 4 a.m. for you.
It's just an hour early. I normally get up at 5, so that's fine.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we don't start it with next week, but the following week, just to trial and see if new people are joining, maybe, and use that also as a KPI of success to see if we should like maybe do that, and maybe we don't have much interest in that area yet, so then we just don't have it to do it too frequently.
I'm fine with doing it because I think it makes sense for the team here.
Yeah.
Any way we can track where videos are being watched if people in that region are watching the YouTube videos?
It's actually a good question. I don't know if Zoom has that feature. It should, or it's a paid feature. But let me find that out actually to see some download statistics and so forth. That would be good.
Okay.
All right. Cool. Well, but if there are, do we have cap for validations? That's been added there. Shouldn't that be under update on open caps? Or, oh no, that's not a cap that we have yet, right? Who wants to talk about the cap for validations, or did we talk about it already? No one? Who?
That could have been added for the framework validation comments that I made in that KEP PR. Thinking about not just framework ownership and who's responsible for deciding what tests go into a framework validation, but also responsibility for updating frameworks. If a change in KUDO breaks your frameworks, what do we do? Do we move it to incubating because it's not working? Do we keep it in stable until someone fixes it? Do we flag it as not compatible with the current version of KUDO? Additionally, how do we validate different versions of Kubernetes, not just 1.13, 1.14, 1.15, but GKE, OpenShift, MKE, different distros, I guess I want to say, not just different versions of Kubernetes. What does that compatibility matrix look like, and is it on a framework by framework basis? That should be, if it is, it should be updated dynamically as part of the testing suite. And then uploaded to your repo, Fabi, as part of that
our
file.
repo, okay? It's our repo.
Our repo.
Is Q coming with a feature set that makes this validation maybe easier, for instance? Do we know?
I think we need to figure out what we want first and then figure out how to implement it. I rarely like looking at how this language would solve the problem as the initial step. I would rather think about how would I solve the problem, language agnostic, and then figure out whether Q is the right format for that or whether we need to add PRs to Q to get that functionality there.
I see, yeah.
I immediately, well, I usually lean to the simple solution for this sort of thing, and it may not work for here, but letting the framework developers specify that as part of whatever gets generated in that index.yaml file.
So are we going to have code owners of each framework folder that have to be there to approve PRs into that?
Yeah, and then they have to maintain a list of the version range, right? I'm thinking in the sense of like you do squiggly 1.4.0, right, and or less than 1.5.0, and something like that, and then a list of supported distributions, and that you mainly maintain it for now. I can think of a bunch of ways to potentially automate that between a CI process to to looking for things in the spec to see if they match up to things in KUDO and trying to do the generation itself. But if it's a matter of just the framework developer specifies that until it doesn't scale anymore.
I don't trust framework developers.
That's right. That's fair.
Especially if KUDO starts changing things, it works on that version of Kubernetes for an older version of KUDO, but they don't update that as, we start issuing PRs and change functionality slightly.
Yeah.
And then if we do, are we responsible as KUDO maintainers of patching all the frameworks that break as a result? And if so, how do we know all the frameworks that break?
I think in one earlier CRD that you created, we had a validation plan, and should we then make it like mandatory for all framework developers to basically introduce a validation plan that we then automatically run with the Q execute command, for instance, and just hope that the output is no error, and then say it passed, for instance.
That validation plan that I've made for Zookeeper was more like a health plan. And I think that's probably its own KEP regarding how do we determine the health of a system, and then do we have a remediation plan that'll run if the health plan fails 3 times in a row? Do we just run the plan frequently like they do for health checks in pods? That's like, right. I think that's a whole separate thing outside of validation of the framework.
Right. So I think Helm does that. You can add as a resource essentially your GitHub and where your thing is coming from. So for instance here it has this maintainers field. It has sources that link to that maintainer, and most likely here. What I really like is it has this, if you deprecate a framework, it has this deprecated true that is then otherwise omitted empty. So I think that is one way of how other projects like trying to solve this, that we could maybe adapt to.
There's something else we need to deal with here too, and that's making sure that what do we do once it's a framework's either stale or not compatible anymore? Do we remove it from index.yaml until it's fixed and prevent someone from installing a bad version? Do we?
Right.
And beyond that, what happens when there's a framework on some version that has a critical CV that we don't want to pull down? For that matter, what happens if? Well, no, we can just redistribute KUDO. That's a separate. If KUDO has a CV, that's a separate discussion entirely.
Yeah, what I like about this deprecated true or false is that it leaves it to the framework developers to stop the active development of a framework, and then other developers to jump in a few months to continue where someone else left. So we can redeprecate, alive then a framework, for instance. So that is, I think, something that is very nice to have, because you don't want to deprecate something forever. You can bring it back from the dead, which I like.
And then from our end, if we have a testing grid like they do for Kubernetes, we'll easily be able to identify frameworks that now are failing their integration tests over the last however many weeks, months, whatever it is, and we can issue that PR for deprecation.
Yep. I thought I saw that somewhere in the code base. They talk exactly about that case with why deprecated, and
it'd be interesting to see what Helm does, what the operator framework's going to do. Yep. I assume AWS has its marketplace. I don't know how they manage that life cycle to make sure things still function correctly. But we're not the first people to try to solve this. So, yeah.
Okay, I think here that's what they talk about, and I like that idea that's been discussed here. With that proposed workflow here to so that the chart can later be reused by publishing a newer version that is not marked as deprecated, for instance. So that would still keep the old version that is maybe buggy or so deprecated, but the newer version then that is following also Semver would not be. Yeah, so it's nice. Yep. Okay. Good. Cool. Well, we'll already over time a little bit. So I would say if like next week we stay to the European time zone, yeah, like we did this week, and then who wants to be the host for next next week's meeting? Any volunteers? Maybe we should like I just do TBD in the document, and then we see that as well. But if
I'll host.
you host. All right, cool. I'll add that then. And so that recording should be available in the next 45 minutes, and then I share it in our Slack channel as well. But if there are no further questions, I would say we conclude this day's meeting and call it a day. Yeah?
Or a morning. Come on.
A morning.
Morning.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for your time, and it's been wonderful working with all of you. Just wanted to get that out there. All right, on record, by the way. On record.
Thanks, Fabi.
Wonderful. All right.
See you next week.
See you next week. Bye, guys.
Bye.